The bikers roared onto the street, tearing down Jack Miller's American flag and mocking the quiet veteran. "What are you going to do, old man?" their leader sneered. Jack said nothing, simply dusting off the flag. They had no idea who they were dealing with, or the storm they just unleashed. Let's start from the beginning. The morning sun cast a golden glow over Lakeview, where freshly painted white fences lined the pristine lawns. Jack Miller, 68 years young, worked in his yard with the kind of quiet determination that made him blend into the neighborhood. Dressed in a well-worn jacket and jeans, he looked like any other retiree enjoying his morning chores. But the neatly hoisted American flag in front of his house told a deeper story, one the neighbors rarely thought to ask about. As Jack raked up the last of the autumn leaves, the rumble of approaching engines shattered the stillness. A gang of 6 bikers roared onto the street, their motorcycles growling like angry beasts. Dressed in leather jackets emblazoned with a grinning skull emblem, they looked like trouble. The leader, a towering redhead with a beard that could double as a bird's nest, dismounted first. His nickname, Red, was as loud as his personality. He sauntered forward, eyeing Jack with a grin that spelled mischief. "Hey, old man," Red bellowed, jerking his thumb toward the flag. "What's with the flag? Trying to prove something?" "Looks like it belongs in a museum." Jack glanced at the group, his weathered face unreadable. Without a word, he turned back to his raking. Red's smirk faltered. "Oh, so you're gonna ignore me now? Real brave of you," he sneered, motioning for one of his crew to join him. A wiry biker with tattoos snaking up his neck strutted toward the flagpole. With a dramatic flourish, he yanked the flag down, crumpled it, and tossed it to the ground. "Oops," the wiry man said, feigning innocence. "Looks like it slipped." From behind their curtains, neighbors peered out, their faces a mix of horror and fascination. No one dared to step outside. Jack set his rake aside, walked over, and picked up the flag. Dusting it off carefully, he straightened up, his back surprisingly firm for a man his age. "Leave," he said calmly, his voice steady. Red snorted, stepping closer. "And what are you going to do if we don't? Call the cops?" "Hate to break it to you, Gramps, but we've got friends in high places. No one's touching us." Jack met Red's glare with a level gaze, then turned and walked back toward his house. The gang erupted in laughter. "Look at him," one of them jeered, too scared to fight back. But Jack paused at his doorstep. Turning slightly, he glanced at the bikers and said in an almost casual tone, "Enjoy your day while you can." That wiped the smirk off a few faces. "What's that supposed to mean?" Red barked, his confidence slipping for just a second. But Jack had already stepped inside, closing the door behind him. The bikers lingered, their laughter now tinged with uncertainty. "Guess we'll have to teach him a lesson later," Red muttered, revving his bike. As they roared away, the curtains in the houses around the block swayed shut. From inside, Jack looked out the window, his expression calm but calculating. The flag rested neatly folded on the table beside him. Whatever was coming next, he was ready. Jack stepped outside the next morning, rake in hand, only to stop short at the sight before him. His once pristine lawn was a mess of tire marks, the deep grooves cutting across the neatly trimmed grass like jagged scars. A torn American flag lay near the gate, fluttering limply in the breeze. Worse, his front door bore a fresh message scrawled in bright red paint, "Old Coward." Jack stood still, his expression as calm as the morning air. He didn't sigh, curse, or mutter under his breath. Instead, he bent down, picked up the flag, and smoothed out its edges as best he could. Then, like a man clocking in for work, he grabbed his tools and began repairing the damage. Neighbors peered out again, their faces a mix of pity and fear. No one dared approach him. Jack worked methodically, as if this was just another chore on his to-do list. By evening, the yard was back to looking respectable, though the faint tire marks remained, like a shadow of the chaos. Jack stood by his flagpole inspecting his work when the rumble of engines broke the quiet once more. The gang was back, their arrival signaled by the laughter that echoed down the street. This time they came armed, not with weapons, but with a bottle of green liquid that glistened in the fading light. Red dismounted first, holding the bottle like a trophy. His grin was as wide as it was malicious. "Well, look at you," Red called out, striding up the driveway. "Got everything looking nice again." But you missed a spot. He gestured mockingly toward Jack's jacket. Let me help you clean it up. The others howled with laughter, parking their bikes in a semicircle like spectators at a show. Jack stayed where he was, hands calmly resting at his sides. Are you sure about this? He asked softly, his eyes meeting Red's with an unnerving steadiness. Red paused for a second, his bravado flickering before doubling down. Oh, I'm sure, old man. You're about to get the makeover of your life. With that, Red flung the bottle's contents at Jack. The green liquid splattered across his jacket, staining it instantly. The gang erupted into another round of laughter, doubling over at the sight. Jack didn't flinch. He looked down at his jacket, then back at Red, his face unreadable. Slowly, he reached into his pocket, pulled out his phone, and snapped a few pictures of the gang. What's this? Your diary? One of the bikers sneered. Gonna post it on your little social media page. Not exactly, Jack replied, tucking the phone back into his pocket. Just making memories. Red's smile wavered. What's that supposed to mean? Jack took a step closer, his voice low but firm. It means you might want to remember this moment. It's not going to end the way you think. The bikers exchanged glances, their confidence flickering under Jack's calm demeanor. But Red shook it off, turning to his crew. Come on, let's leave Grandpa to his little scrapbook. We've got better things to do. They mounted their bikes, engines roaring as they peeled out of the driveway, leaving Jack standing alone in the growing twilight. From his window, a neighbor snapped a picture of the scene, her hands trembling as she whispered, "He didn't even blink." Inside his house, Jack set the stained jacket aside and unfolded the torn flag. As he carefully began to mend it, a faint smile played on his lips. The quiet was back for now, but he knew it wouldn't last. Round two, boys, Jack murmured to himself. Let's see if you're ready for it. Morning arrived with a symphony of tires screeching against asphalt. 3 sleek black SUVs with tinted windows pulled up in perfect formation outside Jack's house. Their polished exteriors reflected the rising sun, and the street seemed to hold its breath. Doors opened in unison, and men in sharp suits stepped out, their movements crisp and precise. From the middle vehicle emerged a tall figure in a military uniform, the medals on his chest gleaming like stars. The man adjusted his cap and strode forward with an air of authority that made the neighbors peeking out from their curtains freeze in awe. It was Jack. Gone was the humble retiree in his faded jacket. Standing there now was a decorated general of the United States Army, radiating the kind of presence that could silence a room, or a street full of stunned onlookers. The commotion drew the attention of Red and his gang, who were lounging by their motorcycles, still basking in their self-proclaimed victory from the night before. Red squinted at the approaching figure, his confident smirk faltering as Jack stopped in front of them. Well, Jack said, his voice calm but edged with steel, it's about time we got properly acquainted. The gang froze. Red glanced at his crew, then back at Jack, his bravado slipping. You're a general? He stammered, his voice suddenly lacking the swagger it had the day before. In retirement, Jack replied, his tone almost casual. But some things, like loyalty and connections, don't fade away. He reached into a sleek leather folder one of the suited men handed him and pulled out a stack of neatly organized papers. What's that supposed to be? Red tried to laugh, though it came out shaky. Jack held the documents up for them to see. This, gentleman, is a warrant for your arrest. The gang collectively paled. For assault, property damage, and desecration of a flag, Jack continued, flipping through the pages like a professor reviewing lecture notes. Oh, and let's not forget intimidation. That's a nice addition to the list, Red sputtered, trying to regain control. You can't just... Jack raised a hand, silencing him with a look that could have stopped a freight train. Your names, Jack said, his voice dropping to a dangerous calm, are already in the hands of the prosecutor. I trust you've got decent legal representation. The street buzzed with murmurs as more neighbors began to gather at their windows, some even stepping onto their porches to witness the unfolding spectacle. Before Red could come up with a coherent response, the sound of sirens filled the air. Police cars rolled onto the street, officers stepping out with an efficiency that suggested they had been thoroughly briefed. Jack turned to the officers and nodded. Gentlemen, I believe you've been looking for these individuals. The officers approached the gang, pulling out cuffs. One by one, the bikers were restrained, their earlier confidence crumbling into silent disbelief. "You can't do this," one of them shouted, though his voice was more plea than protest. Jack's reply was simple. "I'm not doing anything, the law is." As Red was led toward the patrol car, he turned to Jack one last time, his voice a mix of frustration and fear. "You set us up." Jack allowed himself a small smile. "No, son, you set yourself up. I just gave the story a proper ending." The neighbors, who had been quietly watching, erupted into applause. Some began filming the scene, their phones capturing every second of the gang's humiliating exit. Jack stood by his gate, his posture relaxed, as if this were just another day in the life of a retired general. One of the neighbors, a young man holding a cup of coffee, called out, "Jack, you've been holding out on us." Jack chuckled softly. "Some things are better left unsaid until they're needed." As the police cars drove off, the street slowly returned to its peaceful state. Jack turned back to his house, pausing briefly to look at the repaired flagpole. The flag fluttered proudly in the breeze, unyielding and resolute, just like its owner. By evening, the entire town seemed to know what had happened on Jack Miller's quiet street. Local news channels aired footage of the bikers being hauled away in handcuffs, their prized motorcycles loaded onto tow trucks, like trophies being confiscated after a losing battle. The headline read, "Retired General Brings Justice to Neighborhood Trouble." Neighbors began to gather outside Jack's home, forming a small but growing crowd. Some brought cookies or pies, while others came armed with stories of how Jack had always been the quiet hero of the block. A group of teenagers, usually glued to their phones, now stood in awe, recounting the viral video of the bikers' downfall. One of the neighbors, Mrs. Henderson, approached Jack with a beaming smile. She had a plate of homemade brownies in hand, a rare sight considering her reputation as a less than stellar baker. "General Miller, you're a true legend," she exclaimed, her voice trembling with excitement. "I can't believe you handled those hooligans so effortlessly." Jack, who was busy securing the newly repaired flagpole, glanced over his shoulder and chuckled. "I wouldn't say effortlessly, Mrs. Henderson, but sometimes all it takes is a little patience and a good flagpole." The crowd erupted in laughter, the tension of the past few days melting away. Jack straightened the flag, ensuring it caught the evening breeze, and stepped back to admire it. The stars and stripes rippled proudly, a silent testament to resilience and justice. From the middle of the crowd, a younger neighbor shouted, "Hey, Jack, what did you say to those bikers at the end? You had them looking like scared kittens." Jack paused, a mischievous glint in his eye. "I just reminded them of something important," he said, his voice carrying a hint of humor. "What was it?" another neighbor pressed. Jack turned to face the crowd, his calm demeanor now tinged with a quiet authority. "I told them," he said with a small smile, "that real strength isn't in how loud your engine roars or how big your gang is. It's in the principles you stand for." The words hung in the air for a moment before the crowd burst into applause. The sound echoed through the street, a wave of appreciation for a man who had quietly upheld those principles all along. As the applause faded, a teenager near the back held up his phone, grinning. "This video is trending everywhere. You're basically famous now, Mr. Miller." Jack shook his head with a smile. "Let's hope it's for the right reasons," he said, brushing off the attention. "Now, if you'll excuse me, I think I've earned a quiet evening." The crowd began to disperse, leaving behind a sense of camaraderie and admiration. Jack retreated to his porch, sitting down with a glass of iced tea. The flag above him fluttered gently as the sun dipped below the horizon, casting a warm glow over the street. Inside his house, a notification pinged on Jack's phone, a message from an old military friend who had seen the news. It simply read, "Still fighting the good fight, I see. Proud of you." Jack leaned back, his gaze resting on the flag. "Some fights," he murmured to himself, "are always worth it." Outside, the last of the neighbors lingered, sharing stories of Jack's quiet heroism. The street was peaceful again, but it was clear to everyone that their neighborhood had a guardian in Jack Miller, whether they had known it before or not.